The wind howled through the cracks in the old log cabin, carrying the bite of another Wyoming winter. Silas Boone sat hunched at his rough-honeyed table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey at his elbow, and a blank sheet of paper before him. The lamplight flickered across his weathered face, deepening the lines that made him look older than his 42 years. He stared at the page for a long time, wrestling with words that came harder to him than any blizzard or broken horse. Outside, the snow fell thick and silent, wrapping the mountains in a cold that seeped into a man's bones. The cabin creaked against the wind's fury. Inside, Silas reached for his bottle again, letting the burn of whiskey chase away the loneliness that had lived beside him for a decade. Then, with a sigh, he dipped his pen and began to write. To the Matrimonial News Agency of Boston, he printed in slow, blocky letters, "I am a man of simple needs, seeking a wife of quiet disposition. Must cook, keep house, and ask no questions about the past. I offer a solid roof, 3 meals daily, and the protection of my name. No romantics need apply. S. Bon, Grizzly Hollow, Wyoming Territory." He sealed the letter with wax, set it beside the lamp, and sat back. Come morning, he'd ride the 15 down to town and post it. The decision should have brought relief. Instead, it left a heavier weight pressing against his ribs. 3 months later, on a day when the March wind still carried winter's bite, Silas stood on the depot platform in Grizzly Hollow. The train was late as usual. He pulled his coat tighter and took a swig from his flask, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the rails disappeared into gray distance. Around him, townsfolk came and went. Storekeepers, cow hands, mothers with children tugging at their skirts, but all cast sidelong glances at him. Silas Boone didn't come to town often. When he did, people gave him a wide berth. Some remembered the man he'd been during darker years, when he rode with men whose names were whispered more than spoken. Others just saw the hermit up on Redemption Ridge, the trapper who lived alone, trading pelts, speaking little, and drinking much. The train whistle split the cold air. Black smoke coiled skyward as the iron engine thundered into view. Silas's pulse quickened. He straightened, checked the letter in his pocket, the one confirming Miss Evelyn Carter of Richmond. Virginia would arrive today, and tried to ignore the curious eyes watching him. When the locomotive ground to a stop, passengers stepped down one by one. Salesmen clutching their cases, ranch hands, a traveling preacher, his wife. Silas scanned each face, waiting. Then she appeared. She stood in the doorway of the passenger car, framed by steam and sunlight, as if the world had gone still to make room for her. Everything about her defied what he'd imagined. He'd pictured a sturdy woman in simple calico, the kind who could split kindling without flinching. Instead, she wore a faded black dress that had once been fine. Her figure was slim but strong, and her posture carried quiet dignity. Her face was pale as winter moonlight, her full lips pressed into a calm line that betrayed no fear. But it was her eyes that made Silas forget the whiskey in his hand. They were gray, storm gray, and filled with something he recognized all too well. The look of someone who had walked through hell and come out the other side, scorched but unbroken. She stepped down carefully, clutching a small carpet bag. The wind caught a strand of her dark hair pinned beneath a modest bonnet, and that's when he saw it. The scar, a pale line that ran from her jaw down into the high collar of her dress. The bottle slipped from Silas's hand and shattered against the platform. She didn't flinch. Evelyn Carter walked toward him with measured steps, her boots clicking against the wooden planks, the whispers already following her like shadows. "That's her," someone murmured. "The one from Virginia heard she killed a man. Black Widow, they called her." If she heard, she gave no sign. She stopped before him, setting down her bag. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but carried strength. "Mr. Boone, I presume." He nodded, painfully aware of his unshaven face and patched coat. "Miss Carter, Mrs. Carter," she corrected quietly. "Though I suppose that will change soon enough." The wind gusted, swirling snow between them. She didn't shiver. She just looked at him with those steady gray eyes weighing him. "You have a conveyance." He nodded toward the wagon outside. As he bent to lift her bag, he noticed how light it was. Whatever life she'd led back east, she'd left nearly all of it behind. He understood that kind of leaving. As they walked through town, the whispers followed. Folks paused in doorways to stare. The storekeeper, Martin Fletcher, stepped out to watch them pass. The banker's wife pulled her children close. Even the saloon girls went quiet as they crossed in front of the Lucky Strike. Evelyn kept her chin high, her silence calm and deliberate, the silence of someone who'd learned that words could be used as weapons. He helped her onto the wagon seat, noticing her gloved fingers tremble just slightly when they touched his. The first crack in her composure, he climbed up beside her, feeling the weight of Sheriff Watson's eyes on them from across the street. "It's 15 mi to my place," Silas said, taking up the res. "The road's rough," she replied evenly. "I don't mind rough roads, mister." Boone, the horses started forward. Snow flurries spun around them as the town faded behind. For a while, neither spoke. Then Evelyn said, "They talked about me on the train. Thought I couldn't hear voices carrying those cars." She turned to face him fully. "Does it matter to you what they say?" Silas thought about it, eyes on the winding trail ahead. He'd heard the stories himself, that she'd killed her husband, that she'd escaped justice. But he also knew gossip traveled faster than truth. "I reckon everyone's got things they'd rather leave buried," he said finally. "That's why folks come west." Her gaze lingered on him a moment before she looked ahead again. "Yes," she said softly, "I suppose that's true." They rode in silence after that, but the quiet felt different now. Not empty, shared. When the wind rose, Silas wordlessly shrugged off his heavy coat and held it out to her. She hesitated, then accepted, wrapping it around her thin shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured. As they climbed toward the mountains, the snow thickened. Through the veil of white, Silas's cabin came into view, a small shape against the wilderness, waiting. "It ain't much," he said quietly. Evelyn looked from the cabin to the peaks beyond, then back at him. "It's perfect," she said, and for the first time since she stepped off that train, she almost smiled. And somewhere deep inside, Silas Boone, who'd long thought his heart buried with the ghosts of his past, felt the faintest flicker of warmth inside the cabin. The air was still and faintly scented with wood smoke. Evelyn Carter stepped through the doorway and stopped, her gray eyes moving over every inch of the small space. The room was simple: bare log walls, a rough honeyed table, 2 mismatched chairs, and a stone fireplace blackened from years of use. A single window let in the fading light, and beneath it sat a wash basin and a cracked mirror. Silas stood awkwardly near the door, hat in hand, watching her. He'd cleaned the place as best he could before riding to town, but the years of solitude clung to it. The smell of tobacco, gun oil, and dust that no sweeping could quite erase. "Ain't much," he said finally. Evelyn turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "It's more than I expected." She set down her small carpet bag by the wall and slowly unpinned her bonnet. Dark hair stretched chestnut, spilled down in loose waves before she pinned it back again. Silas cleared his throat. "There's a room through there." He nodded toward a narrow doorway covered by a wool blanket. "You can use it till we're properly wed. I'll sleep out here." "That's kind of you," she said softly, "but unnecessary. We'll be married soon enough, won't we?" He shifted uneasily. "Just the same, seems proper." Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer. Then she nodded and turned toward the small iron stove in the corner. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Been a while." Quote. Without another word, she rolled up her sleeves and began unpacking the small bundle she'd brought: some flour, salt, and a bit of dried meat. Within minutes, the smell of frying pork filled the cabin. Silas stood watching her, strangely mesmerized by the quiet precision of her movements. She worked like someone who'd spent her life keeping busy to silence her thoughts. As she stirred the pan, the firelight caught the pale scar on her neck. He tried not to stare, but couldn't help himself. Whoever she was before, whatever she'd been through, it had left its mark. "You don't have to do this," he said finally. "Yes, I do." Her tone was gentle but firm. "We have an arrangement. You promised 3 meals a day. I agreed to cook them. I'd like to start as I mean to go on." He almost smiled at that. A flicker of warmth in a place long gone cold. Fair enough. They ate in silence, the only sound, the crackle of the fire and the moaning wind outside. When they finished, Evelyn washed the dishes, then wiped her hands on a towel before turning to face him. "You said in your letter you wanted a quiet woman who asked no questions about the past," she said. "Do you still mean that?" "I do." "Good," she said, meeting his gaze. "Then we'll get along fine." But as she moved toward her room, she paused by the small mantel. There, among a few trinkets and a faded Bible, stood an old photograph. She lifted it carefully. 2 soldiers in uniform, faces young and proud, stood arm in arm. "Your kin brothers," Silas said quietly, "both gone." She set the picture back without comment and disappeared behind the blanket. He sat by the fire for a long time after, staring into the flames until exhaustion finally drove him to his makeshift bed on the floor. Sometime in the night, Evelyn woke to a sound, a low, strangled cry from the main room. At first, she thought it was the wind, then she heard it again. A man's voice, hoarse, broken, calling out names she didn't recognize. She rose, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and stepped through the curtain. Silas was thrashing in his sleep, caught in some nightmare. Sweat beaded his forehead. "Silas," she said softly. No response. She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "Silas, wake up." His eyes snapped open. For a moment they were wild, unseeing. Then he blinked, breath coming fast. "I sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," she said quietly. "The wind did." He sat up, rubbing his face. "It's the same dream, always the same." She poured water into a tin cup and handed it to him. "You want to talk about it?" Quote, he hesitated, "was a long time ago. War makes men do things they can't wash off. I came up here to bury what's left of that man." Evelyn nodded slowly. The dead don't always stay buried. Their eyes met across the dim light. 2 souls haunted by their own ghosts. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire burned low. Finally, Evelyn said, "Would you like some coffee? Helps after dreams like that." He gave a weary half-smile. "At this hour, I used to walk the nights away when I couldn't sleep," she said. "Coffee makes the hours quieter." Quote, while she stoked the embers and set the pot to boil, Silas sat watching her, the lines of his face softened by the glow. In the silence between them, something fragile took root, a kind of understanding that needed no words. By dawn, she was still awake, sitting at the table with him. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world white and still. Silas's hands were wrapped around his empty cup. "You ever did something necessary that damned you anyway?" he asked. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Then you know I know." When the first light of morning spilled across the cabin floor, Evelyn rose to make breakfast. Silas went to tend the animals. The rhythm between them had shifted overnight, subtle but real. They moved through the day with the quiet ease of 2 people who understood each other's silences. She swept and mended. He split wood and repaired fence posts. By evening, the cabin felt different, warmer somehow, and when night came again, they sat together by the fire without the need for pretense. Neither of them said it out loud, but both felt it. The strange, steady comfort of not being alone anymore. By the 4th morning, a pale sun shone over the mountains, melting the last of the snow from the cabin roof. Silas had been splitting wood when he heard the sound of horses. He set the axe aside and wiped his brow. Evelyn, kneading bread dough inside, went still at the same sound. 3 riders were coming. Up the trail, 2 men and a woman dressed neat as Sunday service. The lead rider was Reverend Walsh, his long black coat snapping in the cold wind. His wife rode beside him, spine stiff as the church pews she guarded, and the third was Deacon Porter, young and eager, his eyes too curious for decency. Silas stepped out onto the porch, jaw tight. Reverend Brother Boone, the Reverend said, tipping his hat, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. Word in town is, you've taken in a new woman. My intended, Silas answered flatly. Mrs. Walsh's lips pinched tight. Yes, from Virginia, isn't she? One with the trial, quote. Evelyn appeared in the doorway then, apron dusted with flour, gray eyes calm but watchful. She stood beside Silas, chin high, the wind tugging at a loose strand of dark hair, Mrs. Carter, the Reverend said, barely hiding the judgment in his tone. I thought it proper to welcome you and to remind you that Grizzly Hollow is a God-fearing town. Then perhaps you should start by fearing him more than gossip. Evelyn said evenly. Mrs. Walsh gasped. The deacon looked away to hide a grin. Silas's voice was quiet but firm. You've said your piece, now say your goodbye. Reverend Walsh's face darkened. This town won't forget your choices, Mr. Boone, or the company you keep. Then let them remember it well, Silas said, because I'll stand by her come what may. When the riders left, Evelyn turned back toward the cabin, her face unreadable. Inside, she went to the stove, stirring the stew that had begun to bubble. They'll talk, she said quietly. They already do. Silas replied, doesn't bother you. He shrugged. I've been an outlaw, a soldier, a drunk, and now a husband-to-be. There ain't much left they can call me that I haven't been. That drew the faintest smile from her. That night, as the fire crackled low, Evelyn finally spoke of the scar. She didn't plan to. It simply came out between spoonfuls of stew and the soft hum of the wind outside. His name was Thaddeus, she said, my husband back in Richmond. Silas set his bowl aside and listened. He was charming, handsome, the kind of man mothers warn their daughters about. Only, you don't believe them until it's too late. The night he died, he'd been drinking, accused me of shaming him, of looking at another man. I was 22 and stupid enough to think I could reason with him. He came at me with a knife. Her hand went to her throat, fingers brushing the silver line there. I grabbed the poker. I didn't mean to kill him, but I wasn't going to let him finish what he started. She looked up then, expecting horror or pity. Silas gave neither. Good, he said simply. He deserved it. Quote, tears welled in her eyes, though her voice stayed steady. The jury didn't see it that way. They called it lack of evidence. But to everyone else, I was a murderess. He reached across the table, rough fingers brushing her hand. Then everyone else can go to hell. She laughed, a quiet, surprised sound. You don't know what it's like to carry something like that. He held her gaze, don't I? For the first time, she saw it clearly. The same heaviness in him, a guilt he carried from some long-ago battlefield. 2 wounded souls who'd survived their own wars, now sitting together in the soft light of a Wyoming fire. The days passed, and something fragile began to bloom between them. Evelyn filled the cabin with small touches. A clean curtain, a vase of dried sage, a quilt she found tucked away in a chest. Silas repaired the door, fixed the roof, and found himself coming home faster from his traps than before. Then one afternoon, as Evelyn was hanging laundry, she saw dust rising on the trail below. 3 riders again, different this time. The lead man's fine coat and polished boots marked him as an Easter. Her stomach turned cold. When he drew close, she recognized him. James Blackwood, Thaddeus's brother. Well, he said, swinging down from his horse, if it isn't the Black Widow herself. Silas appeared from the barn, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes sharp. You got business here, James smirked. Legal business. I'm here to bring a fugitive back to stand trial. He handed Silas a folded paper. Commonwealth of Virginia. Evelyn Blackwood wanted for murder. Silas didn't even glance at it. You can tell Virginia it's 1,500 m east. Keep riding, James's smile faltered. You're protecting a killer, Boone. Silas's voice turned low and dangerous. She killed a monster. Now get off my land before I show you how I deal with one still breathing. The men backed away, muttering threats. This isn't over, James called. It is for you, Silas said, raising the rifle just enough to make his meaning clear. That night, as the fire burned low, Evelyn sat silent beside him. You should have let them take me, she whispered. You could lose everything. He turned to her, eyes steady. Evelyn, everything I ever had worth losing burned away a long time ago. You're what's left worth keeping. She reached for him then, and the distance between them vanished. The kiss was fierce and trembling, born of fear, defiance, and the desperate need to feel alive. The cabin's shadows wrapped around them, the storm outside forgotten. By morning, they were husband and wife in every way that mattered. Weeks later, word came that James Blackwood had been arrested in Cheyenne, caught trying to bribe a marshal into reopening her case. The law had finally turned on him. The news spread fast through Grizzly Hollow. The whispers that once followed Evelyn became nods of respect. The same women who'd crossed the street to avoid her now stopped by with pies and questions about cooking or sewing. She'd gone from scandal to survive her, and the town quietly took her in. That summer, the mountains bloomed wild with color. Evelyn planted a small garden behind the cabin, beans, squash, and sage. Silas built a new porch facing the sunset. In the evenings, they'd sit side by side, the silence between them no longer heavy, but full of peace. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her with that quiet wonder, and she'd smile. What are you thinking? She'd ask. He'd shrug, gaze drifting toward the horizon. Just that I never figured a man like me would get a second chance. She'd take his hand, rough and scarred, and press it to her cheek. Neither did I. And when the sun sank behind the Wyoming peaks, painting the sky gold and crimson, the wind would carry their laughter across the valley, a sound too rare and too precious for a land that had known so much silence. For the first time, the ghosts that haunted them both seemed to fade. The mail-order bride and the haunted gunslinger had found not perfection, but something far more enduring, peace, and in the heart of the wild, unforgiving frontier.